Hey guys, it's Ben here with the Half Court Heave podcast. I'm here with Colin. I'm here with Arjun. We're here after we had our little Christmas holiday break, but we're back to bring you more content than ever. So you might as well go ahead and like and subscribe, and then comment. It's the dumbest thing that Arjun said today. I bet there will be a lot because we have a lot of good stuff to talk about. Maybe it'll be about DK Metcalf. Maybe it'll be about a team that he likes that he's overrating. But go ahead and like and subscribe and comment. Actually, you know what? If you're watching right now, go ahead and comment Arjun with the goat emoji, and we will put you in the name for a giveaway for a sweatshirt. All right. And then, speaking of our sweatshirts, we have them at our shop. I don't actually have mine on right now. This is a Hornets hoodie, but I think Colin has his on, and Arjun has a shirt on, but they're currently no longer on sale, but you can still get them for a very cheap price, and it's very appreciated from us and very appreciated from ladies if you're wearing one because it's pretty nice, it's pretty drippy. But anyways, let's just get into it already, and talk about the first thing we do want to talk about today, which is, does Steph Curry have too little help to make this Warriors team a playoff team? Colin, what do you think?
I think this team could be a playoff team. Right now, they're underperforming. This is the worst it's going to be. They're adjusting to a new system. Kelly Oubre can't get worse from here. Andrew Wiggins not going to get worse from here. Draymond Green's injured right now. And I think once they get back into the swing of things, and James Wiseman has been playing well, so that is with him playing well, Draymond Green back, and Wiggins and Oubre playing better, I think that they could potentially be a playoff team. It won't be easy. There's a lot of other teams like the Suns and the Pelicans, Blazers, teams like that they'll have to compete with. But I just can't count the Warriors out after the many years that they've been so good.
Okay, no, I definitely can count them out. Preseason, I was saying they will probably be about a 9 seed or a 10 seed, and I'm not really confident with that right now with what I'm seeing. Yes, there's no possible way for Kelly Oubre to get worse than he is right now, but that's kind of a telltale sign of how that team's doing right now and how it's fitting. This is not a good fit. I've said this multiple times before, and I've been clowned and clowned and clowned for it. You have Steph Curry out there with Wiggins and Oubre on the perimeter playing defense. Any team is scoring on that. You're getting 150 a night from them. And Kelly Oubre, I think he scored already tonight in the game against the Pistons, but before that he was what, 0 for 31, 0 for 28 on shots that weren't dunked for the Warriors so far. This team can't get worse, and that's a sign of how bad they really are. They can't really be the 8 seed with the competition they have in front of them. They have too many good teams. It's already tough to decide. I think the Pelicans are definitely better than them, and they're either probably the 8, 9, or 10 seed. So I can't really even see them right now being a lock for the play-in. Nevertheless, the playoffs. But before I really say anything else, Arjun, what do you think about this?
And the problem with what you're saying is that I'm agreeing with Colin on this one because I think that this is rock bottom. They've hit rock bottom, and Kelly Oubre is a player who's not relying on dunks. He is a solid scorer. He'll give you points, but what we're seeing from him is not what we expected. We knew Andrew Wiggins had efficiency problems. We knew he wasn't the most efficient player, but we didn't expect this happening. So I think that these players are skilled enough to still for Steph to lead them to a playoff team. So I think that really these two players are not a bad fit for this Warriors team because remember, the Warriors aren't a defensive system team. Oubre is he's a lob guy. He can catch alley-oops. He can run the floor. Andrew Wiggins is a scorer. These are two players that can fit well with this team. So I think that if they improve, they show signs they can actually score. I think this team can be a playoff team.
No, okay.
And one thing I would say,
You're talking about a team being led off of no defense, and that you explained it yourself. It's a team where any team's going to 120 plus them a night because they don't have the perimeter defense. Yeah, when they get Draymond back,
Draymond will come back soon.
Yeah, no, but that'll be in the post. It's a league that's primarily built around perimeter shooting, and you have no perimeter defense. That's not. I don't care how good Stephen Curry is. That's not a playoff team. But that is another thing about this team that I want to talk about is nothing taken away from Stephen Curry. He's the greatest shooter of all time. I think the second greatest point guard we've ever seen. But can he lead a team like this to the playoffs? No. He can't lead this type of team to a playoff. If this was LeBron James, could I bet on them making the playoffs? Absolutely. If it was a player like that, like maybe not Kevin Durant, but like LeBron James especially, it's those types of players that can carry this type of team to the playoffs. Can Stephen Curry really carry a team to the playoffs? No. He's had Klay Thompson. He's had a all-star prime Draymond Green, which he doesn't have anymore even when he's back. And he's had Kevin Durant. He hasn't led a team anywhere by himself. And that's not a knock on him at all. He's just not that type of player to take a team like this caliber, to the playoffs, and especially not more.
One thing I want to mention. That's just an assumption. That's the problem. That's just an assumption. I'll let you go, Colin. But, Ben, that's just an assumption that Steph Curry cannot lead. I mean, we haven't seen it, obviously. But, I mean, this guy is a 30-point-per-game scorer. This guy, you can't say he's not going to lead this team. Because even though we haven't seen it, you can't count him out by the season. These are they've only played a couple of games, and obviously they haven't played well. But that's not because of Steph Curry's lack of leadership. I mean,
I wasn't saying it's not leadership. I think it's just his play style isn't sustainable for leading a team single-handedly. Like, yeah, he can be the best player on a team. We've seen that. He was the best player on a team that won multiple finals. I know it was probably one of the greatest dynasties of all time. But him by himself, his play style, that can't win when you don't have help. That's why Trae Young was a 13 seed last year with the Hawks, and that was a somewhat decent team, and it was led by him. That type of player can't be the first option to lead a team to the playoffs by themselves. They need the help. That's why he's needed Klay Thompson, and that's not a knock on him. But the lack of defense, the lack of size, the lack of everything you need to really carry a team to the playoffs, he doesn't have, even though he is probably the second greatest point guard of all time.
All right, here. So the biggest problem right now, I hate to put things on Steve Kerr, one of the greatest coaches. He's done so well with the Warriors. He hasn't had to make adjustments. He's had such great players. He's had a system that's worked for him. Won, 4 championships. Everything was working. And suddenly, he's got a team with players that he's not accustomed to, with a play style he's not accustomed to, and he's trying to have them fit the roles of what Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant did. And so he's going to have to make adjustments. And for him, during his coaching career, that's just not something he's had to do. And so these first few games have been a huge adjustment for him because he's realizing this is not how I can play these players, because the things that have worked for years just aren't going to work anymore. So I think these few games have showcased what happens when you put Kelly Oubre and Andrew Wiggins into the plays that will run for Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant. That's simply not going to work. So Steve Kerr, being the great coach that he is, he's going to change it up and things are going to get better. But I think that just takes a little bit of time. So this beginning of the season is going to be shaky. But I really think
what's going to be the fix to that? I mean, they have no bench. This has been a problem that I've been mentioning and that a lot of people have been mentioning, is that this team has a really weak bench, probably a bottom 5 bench in the league, if not lower than just bottom 5. I mean, Damian Lee, now they don't even have Marquise Chris off the bench. They really are lacking on when it comes to the second unit. So when you're thinking like Klay Thompson, he was the defense that really brought that team together. Like, of course, Draymond was the defensive anchor, but then you also had Klay Thompson, who was an underrated and elite defender on the court. Now you have Kelly Oubre and Andrew Wiggins backed up by Juan Anderson. Like, you have Damian Lee. These guys that aren't really the elite players you want to be a playoff team coming off the bench. You then have less elite play. Like you then have worse players coming off your bench behind those guys who then don't fill the roles of what those guys can't do. Like Juan Anderson and Damian Lee can't fill the defensive roles that Wiggins and Oubre can't fill.
Ben, the thing is that I get your Ben. The bench argument is a good argument. It's a solid argument that they are lacking bench scoring. But the thing is that this is a team where you can realistically play Steph Curry the entire game. You don't really need. I mean, the Celtics lack so much bench scoring. I mean, they had no bench scoring whatsoever. They had Brad Wanamaker coming off the bench, and guess what? They were still a 3 seed. They were still a solid team. So when you see it, I think with Kelly Oubre and Andrew Wiggins at their peak scoring, which I think they will get to that 20 points per game, 15 points per game from each of them. Bench scoring won't be a real issue. The only issue is perimeter defense. I think Draymond can really cover that up. But yeah.
Well, how is Draymond supposed to cover up the perimeter defense? Then you're leaving a rookie in the middle and James Wiseman to do all the dirty work. Then you have four guys on the
Yeah, and
perimeter
James Wiseman is capable of doing it. If you saw
of
how he
keeping
defended
the entire
Giannis,
post.
he did
He's a
job.
great player. He's a dog. He's probably right now the most NBA ready rookie that there is, in my opinion. But if you're putting him in the situation where he has to control the entire post enough to make that team a playoff team, I'm sorry, but you're not making it to the playoffs. But the next thing I do want to talk about is the Clippers. Of course, there's a lot of talk about the Clippers right now. They were without Kawhi, and they lost by 51 points to the Kristaps Porzingis-less Dallas Mavericks. And now people are questioning them once again. And the question I have for you guys today is, are the Clippers serious contenders this year, Arjun?
All right. First off, I'm going to start off with saying that this was a terrible loss. I mean, we have never seen such a more lopsided game in NBA history, but I still have faith in this Clippers team that they can be a serious contender like they were last year. Because keep in mind, Kawhi's impact cannot be reinstated. This guy's a 30-point per game scorer with unreal defense. So they didn't have him. They didn't have a bunch of key guys. And I think that even before that game, they were still playing very well. Paul George was playing at an elite level before. We were all talking about, vaccine P, he's back. And he has one pretty not so great game. And people are all trashing him. You can't trash a guy after one regular season game where his star player was out. I mean, this is a team that fill their holes. They have Serge Ibaka, who I think even though he is old, he is still a defensive anchor. This team is still, in my opinion, with the depth they have with Marcus Morris. They have Reggie Jackson. I mean, I still think this team is a contending team.
No. Okay. When it comes to contending, you go like, top 3, top 4 teams in each conference, and you're like, you know what? Like in their respective conference, you go, they're a top 4 team, they're contending. Nobody goes in depth with contending. But when you hear the word serious contending, I think of that as I can imagine them hoisting the trophy this year. I can see them winning the championship this year. No way I can see the Clippers winning the championship this year, so I can't call them serious contenders. I can call them contenders and hey, they're probably going to finish like 2nd or 3rd seed in the West, and they're going to finish right behind the Lakers in the regular season, and that's great. You call them contenders. Serious contenders, no. I can't see Kawhi, I can't see PG, I can't see them hoisting the trophy with the roster they have right now and the head coach they have right now. When you look at Paul George, you said you can't go down on a guy after he has one bad regular season game. That's true. But when we look at the playoffs, you said vaccine P, like regular season P. Paul George, he's a great regular season player. But when it comes to the playoffs, as we all know, he's not reliable. He's not the same guy when it comes to playoff time. Maybe he could prove us wrong, but consistently in the past, he's proven not to be a great playoff player. And really, when you look at this offseason, did they change enough to become serious contenders where I could really see a scenario where they take down the Lakers this offseason? No. Paul George, he has to prove he can perform in the playoffs, because I don't care. He played really, really well on opening night, and then the day after that, he played just about as good as he did opening night. And then he, of course, flopped against the Mavericks, but didn't have Kawhi. When it comes to the playoffs, he needs to be a better player. Serge Ibaka replacing Montrezl Harrell, they didn't get guys like Rajon Rondo. They didn't have a great offseason, and then the teams around them had even better off seasons than people could have imagined, like the Lakers. I can't see them even making out of the West, so I can't really call them serious contenders with the current roster and current coach they have right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they're contenders. They're not serious contenders. There's no way they beat the Lakers. They aren't even at the same competition level at this point, in my opinion, after what we saw last year. But one question I do want to propose, I understand the teams around them are different. How much worse is this team led by Kawhi than the 2019 Raptors Kawhi-led team? Because when I look at these rosters, I'm really not sure this team is any worse than that team. Different circumstances, different teams, East versus West. But it really shows that the teams around you determine more whether you're a contender than necessarily the team that you have. So I think this team will be a good regular season team. I think they will make it to the second round or the conference finals. But I don't really think they're that much better than a team like the Portland Trailblazers at this point.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's a very fair point. That's something I want to grow upon, is that just some teams that I think have a way better path than they do is when you look at maybe, let me start at the bare minimum. Let's look at the Phoenix Suns. The Phoenix Suns, I mean, they're probably going to finish around the 7 or the 8 seed regular season wise. That's probably, not even probably, that team healthy as a 7 or 8 seed is the scariest 7 or an 8 seed that the NBA has ever seen. There is nobody that wants to face Chris Paul, one of the greatest point guards that there ever has been to live, one of the, like a top 3 playmaker all time. And then you move over, you look at Devin Booker, one of the most prolific scorers the NBA has today. And then the first overall pick 3 years ago, DeAndre Ayton at center, running the pick and roll with those two guys. There is no team that wants to face the Phoenix Suns in the first round. And the Clippers probably will have to face them if they are the 2 or if they're the 2 or the 3 seed facing the 6 or the 7. They'll probably have to face them. And you know what? I'll say it. I like the Suns odds better than I like the Clippers odds right now to make it out to the finals. I like them better because you have a guy in Chris Paul who performs really well in the playoffs. We haven't seen Devin Booker perform in the playoffs because he hasn't made it yet with that roster they've had around him his entire career. But we saw in his 8 games in the bubble, he was amazing. They were 8-0. You saw DeAndre Ayton, the same thing. This team has a lot of capabilities, and they have a guy, they have a leader. The Clippers don't have a leader, like a vocal leader. Like, of course, you can say Kawhi's probably vocal in the text chain like Lou Will said, like he said multiple times. But on the court, vocal leader, a guy leading them out on the court, they don't have that, and then the Suns do. And then the Trailblazers, the Lakers, the Nuggets, even the Jazz. I wouldn't say the Pelicans at all, but like those teams that I named, I absolutely like their odds to get out of the West better than I like the odds of the Clippers right now.
Ben, the problem is that you're making a good case. We all know what Paul George is capable of, but we all know what the Clippers are capable of because this is a team with probably the best defensive mix and offensive mix because you have you have a 30-point per game score, a potential 30-point per game score. You have a potential 20-point per game score. And you've got many other scorers on the bench. This is a team you can't compare them to the Utah Jazz. I mean, the Jazz are a great team, but they're young. They don't have the same identity as the Clippers do. You guys made a fair point.
What identity do the Clippers have?
Look, the Clippers have Marcus Morris. I mean, they have Marcus Morris. You got Zubac, who's a terrific defender. They've got Reggie Jackson, who is a solid scorer, who can get 2 buckets when they're not great players, but they can give you the buckets. Who do the Jazz have? Royce O'Neal. What is Royce O'Neal?
Oh, okay. When we're talking about identity, we talk about the Jazz went just 1 game short of being just as far as the Clippers went last season.
Yeah, well, they blew a 3-1 lead. That's on them.
The Jazz
they should have won, but they blew that lead. And I mean, credit to the Nuggets. But that's on them. That's not on the
Jazz. The Jazz have a guy who shows up in the playoffs.
You can tell me the Jazz are better than the Clippers right now. You don't even make that argument, all right? Because I feel like Kawhi Leonard is suddenly becoming really underrated because people are saying, "Oh, well, he doesn't talk enough." This dude won a championship in 2019. He won the championship with the Spurs, Finals MVP on 2 different teams. I mean, you're talking about it like this team can't even somewhat contend or beat a team like the Suns, and we forget that they still have Kawhi Leonard. And he's still such a good player. I just think you're kind of underrating Kawhi Leonard right now.
I mean, Ben, we can talk about how you said that Kawhi was the most overrated defender in the NBA right now. We can talk about that. I mean, Kawhi, this is like the same treatment Tim Duncan got. They're both quiet, but they're both so good. Ben, now you just got, that's so outrageous to say that those teams that are so that are like, okay, I can see the Suns, they're a dangerous team. You can't say the Pelicans are the Clippers are barely better than the Pelicans.
I didn't say they were barely better. I said I can't incorporate the Pelicans into that conversation.
When you say it, you said they're like
okay, maybe I went too far with the Jazz. But when it comes down to maybe, I would say the teams, I would say probably I would have a safer bet on getting to the finals or being better in the playoffs. I would go with the Lakers. I would go with the Nuggets. Those 2 teams are absolute locks. The Suns, I would say maybe even the Mavericks, because we saw what Luka did to the Clippers last year without Kristaps Porzingis. He brought them to 6 games, and he didn't even have the by far second best player on that team next to him. That team is going to be lethal this year, and it would absolutely be a safer bet for them to get out of the West than the Clippers would, in my opinion. And then I would say at that point, that's just about it. Besides, the Suns are probably the most out of the group type team, but they're really being slept on right now because of Chris Paul's really underrated ability to lead a team. But next thing I do want to talk about is talking about my Charlotte Hornets. I do want to talk about, should the Hornets trade Rozier or Graham to free up room for Melo to grow? And this would just be a question of itself, not which or the other. Personally, I think that they shouldn't until Melo proves that he's better than Rozier or Graham, which I think he will over time. Once that time comes, then you trade Rozier or Graham based on who is the more consistent, better player at that time. Once he proves he's better than one or the other, then you trade the one who's worse, obviously. I think that, but when it comes down to like which one you trade, once Melo proves that he's better than one of those two guys, as of right now, I'm trading Devontae Graham. As much as it hurts me to say, he's one hell of a basketball player. He was great last year. It was practically his rookie season because he barely played in his actual rookie season, and they put up 18-8 last year. It was a little inefficient, and he was a great basketball player. But when it comes to consistent, efficient basketball, Terry Rozier was extremely slept on last season. He's only a year older than Devontae Graham, and he was putting up just about better stats, just less assists, and he was doing it on 40% shooting from three. The guy, and especially this year so far, I know it's a very small sample size, but he's been playing all-star basketball, and I'm not saying he's a lock to be like this all season, but I'm not saying that this is his absolute ceiling and he's peaking right now. He could definitely consistently be this good all season. I don't see it not coming out of him, and he's also a great playoff performer. We saw it with the Celtics when Kyrie was out and he was there. He's a great player when it comes to the playoffs too, so I'd say he's a way safer bet, and he's a much more consistent defensive player than Devontae Graham. So if you had to trade one or the other, I would trade Devontae Graham to free up room, and I think it's a when it happens thing. Right now, I wouldn't trade either of them because they're both playing consistently better than Melo is right now, but once Melo, and once is the word, not if, once he proves he's better than one or the other, then you trade the one who's the worst basketball player at that time. I think that's pretty simple.
Ben, I'm agreeing with you on that one. I'll meet you halfway there because I think that you shouldn't trade either of them because right now I think the real villain here is obviously Borrego. Their coach is just not giving them any time whatsoever. I mean, Lamelo hits a three, he sits on the bench. He gets put in for 3 more minutes and sits on the bench. I mean, his minutes distribution is so inconsistent. He never gets time to develop actual momentum. I think that's what's really that's why he's putting up these, like, you could say empty stats, because I know a lot of people are talking about how LaMelo stats don't actually look good. I've seen a Hornets game. He is looking good. He's looking like a good facilitator. He just needs more chances to take shots, and he's rushing the shots that he actually takes. So I think that if you had to, I personally think that Rozier would be the one to trade because he offers more value to other teams. And I think if you're the Hornets, if you could secure a really an all-star caliber center, Rozier should be the main center of that trade package. And I think that would secure you a really good center for your team.
Yeah, I think just Colin, before you start talking, like Rozier right now, obviously I would say if you're trading one right now, you trade Rozier, which doesn't go with what I said before, but it's like that what Devontae Graham is doing right now, because shooting-wise, he's in a complete slump, that his value's at an all-time low right now because of the slump he's in. Rozier, you could probably look at a lot of general managers right now that have centers at Rozier's level that he's playing right now, and you could make that trade happen, and that would be a great trade. I think the Hornets, if they got an all-star level defensive-minded center, not a scoring-type center, just a guy that can get in there and do his job on the defensive and rebounding end of the basketball court, then that team would possibly be like a top 5 seed in the East eventually, because them with the center would be just about as lethal as you can get with the scorers they have and the facilitators they have. But yeah, definitely, if you're trading one right now, you trade
Ben, let Colin.
I was just about to pass it on to him. But if you're trading one right now, you got to trade Rozier, but I don't think you should trade any of them.
Yeah, right now, I look at this and I want to look at the Oklahoma City Thunder last year. You have Dennis Schroeder, Shai Alexander, and Chris Paul. And 3 guards worked really well together, got in the 5 seed in the playoffs, overperformed massively. I look at the Hornets and it could be a similar situation. I think right now you develop Lamelo Ball, but you have to give him minutes. I mean, a player is not simply going to develop by sitting on the end of the bench. I feel like LaMelo Ball is in one of these situations like when you first get on 2K and you start with your my player and your coach doesn't play you. So when you go in, you just happily like throw up all the shots you get. That's kind of what he's doing right now because he just doesn't have the opportunity. So his stats might not look great, but he passes the eye test because he's playing all right. And he just needs some time to develop. Right now, I wouldn't bank on anything right now or make any rash decisions. I would wait until I could get a good offer. It would have to be a really solid offer because I think the Hornets are in a fine situation with these guards, but a center obviously would help because Cody Zeller isn't really going to cut it as much as I want.
Ben, I know I don't watch a lot of. I'm not as big as a Hornets fan as you, but the way I see it, I don't think you should trade either of them honestly because, I mean, look how, like Colin said, look how that team. I mean, Sam Presti went on a pick for frenzy. I mean, he's a great GM, but oh my god, I mean, he would trade his kids for a first round pick. Like, it's to a point where Ben. The thing is that we saw how it worked. It worked pretty well with OKC. They were able to distribute minutes pretty well. Schroeder got his minutes. I mean, Shea got his minutes. Chris Paul got his minutes. So I think you could make it work out. I think if you keep him, if LaMelo starts to turn into a player where he is like just like a superstar player, like he just reaches a whole other level, then you would make a trade. But I think you should keep your current roster.
When it comes to those three players, I think obviously if Devontae Graham was like, you know what, coach, LaMelo Ball, he has that potential, and I want to win with this team, I'll come off as the sixth man. Obviously, you take that and you run with it unless you get an extreme offer for a great center because Devontae Graham, he has potential to be an all-star guard. We've seen it in his past. We've seen the flashes of that. And Terry Rozier shows the same flashes. Maybe he's had more years in the NBA to prove himself, but he's also had less volume than Devontae Graham has on the Celtics. They both have all-star guard potential, and I think most general managers should know that by now. So you could get good value for them, but if one of them did want to come off the bench, obviously you bring them off the bench, and that would work very effectively. But when it comes to potential, you look at LaMelo Ball, and you look at the fact that LaMelo Ball right now, he's shown the flashes. Like, of course, it's the eye test because he's playing like 30-second spurts from James Borrego's system, and he said he's going to incorporate him more, but these spurts aren't cutting it for him to play consistent basketball. When you look at his potential, he has all NBA potential. He has that top guard potential that the other two, they have all-star potential. They don't have his potential. So once you actually incorporate him into that offense, you can make that decision. But when you have a coach that's not incorporating him into the offense in the slightest, putting him in for a little 1 minute, 2 minute spurts at the end of quarters, you're not really going to see what he can actually do statistically for your team enough to make a decision. But the further we go down the road with this Hornets team, we'll tell more of how it can go. But right now, I would say you don't trade either of them. But the next thing I do want to talk about.
I want to bring up real quick before we move on, a trade that I've kind of talked about, and Ben, I'm sure you wouldn't like this too much, but Terry Rozier knows the Celtics system well. He was there. You send Terry Rozier up to Boston, and the Celtics have a trade exception right now that they could use to take on his contract. And you send Daniel Tice, one of the young rookies or younger players, and a first-round pick because next year's draft is loaded. And the Hornets, they could use some potential because right now they're just not title contenders. They're barely playoff contenders. And you send a defensive-minded center on a small contract.
I think Daniel Tice, like you just said, Daniel Tice is a good center.
Stop it. No, Daniel Tice isn't even better than Cody Zeller. Of course, nobody wants to hear us debate about that because no one gives a flying anything about Cody Zeller versus Daniel Tice, of course. But like,
I know what you mean. That's a great matchup.
Daniel Tice and Cody Zeller are about the same tier of average center. Like, if you're trading Terry Rozier, especially with how he's playing right now, you're not trading him for Daniel Tice and
a first round pick.
No, and it's your like 26th pick in the draft. I mean, like, the Hornets have, like, 2 second-round picks and their first-round pick next year, but they're not about to trade Terry Rozier, who has an all-star potential, for Daniel Tice and a first-round pick. I get it. You're a Celtics fan. But, anyways, before we go down too far down the road of talking about Daniel Tice and Cody Zeller too much, because that's a haunted road for views, let's go ahead and talk about the Nets, because they are a great thumbnail team, and they're a great team to talk about, and they're fun to talk about, but right now we got to talk about Spencer Dinwiddie and their finals hopes. Do you guys think that the Nets are still your Eastern Conference favorites to escape from the East, even without Spencer Dinwiddie this season? Colin, what do you think?
Yes, obviously. The Bucks are on up there. The Nets are just playing so well. I mean, like Kyrie and KD, this team completely runs through them. Dinwiddie is involved, but he wasn't really that involved in the offense even. This team runs completely through two players. You've got LeVert who can step up and start now. He showed last season he can be a really, really good player. And he can be extremely effective. Playing alongside Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, he doesn't just have to take a bunch of shots. He can take smart shots that they put him in a good position to take because the defense is drawn to Kyrie and KD. I'm really not that worried about the loss of Spencer Dinwiddie. You've got two competent centers that can spread the floor. I mean, it's not that huge of a loss. And I respect him. I think he's a good player. He was good last season. But the Nets as a whole are just such a good team that runs completely through two players.
Okay.
It's not that huge of a deal.
Yeah, so I think we have to agree to disagree to a point where I think they're obviously still my favorites to win the East. I mean, we've seen no flashes of change. Even we haven't seen anything in the positive direction from the Bucks so far. Like they lost to the Knicks by 20. Of course, they're still going to be a great team, but they still haven't shown any signs of being better than what KD and Kyrie have been. KD's proven to be just as good as he was before. I thought he would maybe be at 80, 85%. He's the exact same player as he was before, and that is fascinating to me that he's done that. That getting back to his form, I was saying Dominique's the only one that's got no. KD is the new model for the Achilles injury. People would always say, no, Dominique's the only one. Now it's KD's the one who's gotten back to his full form. That team's looking great right now, and they still are my favorites to win the East. But when it comes to Spencer Dinwiddie, he is a really big impact for that team. Coming off the bench, they do have a really deep bench. Now they have Bruce Bowen. He was a great pickup with now what's happening for them because he can do a lot for them off the bench in replacement of Spencer Dinwiddie. But Spencer Dinwiddie, that's a huge hit for them. That'll probably be a hit for them in the seeding. They'll probably be maybe the 3 seed now. I don't know if the Celtics could overtake them, but right now I think they drop a little bit in seeding, but they're still my favorites to win it, to get out of the East and lose to the Lakers in 5 like any other team would. But generally, Karis LeVert, DeAndre Jordan, that whole second unit, everything about this team is drawn to perfection. Losing Spencer Dinwiddie is a big pain for them, but they can just grow with having the third best bench instead of the first best bench in the league now. I think they're obviously still my title favorites, but Arjun, are they still yours?
I think in a way they still are, but I have lost confidence in them. I've lost some confidence in them because I think if Dinwiddie's out for the entire season, that is not good news at all. Because I get what you're saying, Colin, and it's a completely true fact that it's KD and Kyrie. I get it. They are two terrific players, but if you look at it this way, I'm going to draw a conclusion. I'm going to draw a comparison where you compare the 2004 Lakers. The 2004 Lakers had two absolute superstars. You had Kobe and Shaq. Now you had Karl Malone and Gary Payton, who we know were capable of. This is a loaded team. But when it came to the playoffs, this team just underperformed. I mean, Kobe and Shaq were going crazy, but other guys, Gary Payton and Karl Malone were shooting one for 15. They were terrible during the playoffs. They just didn't know what to do. They were expecting to get their asses hauled by those two players, and that's why they lost against Detroit. But take this Nets team against the Hornets. If you look back at that team, then Spencer Dinwiddie got injured early, and the Charlotte Hornets, although Rozier had a good game, he had a great game. Graham was missing shots. The Martin brothers were out there breaking shots. Lamelo was being tossed around there from bench to the floor. They weren't playing they weren't playing that well. Let me just say this: Tarian Prince, their whole bench, Joe Harrison, they all went 0 for 14 from 3-pointers. Their entire bench. Not their entire bench, but I think it was a combined 3 players, probably was, but it went 0 for 14. This bench cannot perform if I promise you, they're gonna get their asses hauled by KD and Kyrie. When KD and Kyrie have troubles, they're not gonna do anything. So Spencer Dinwiddie is one of those players that can put up 20 points per game on your bench, besides Karis LeVert.
I think you're underrating their bench in a point where they have Karis LeVert, Joe Harris. Joe Harris was the 3-point contest champion the other year. And then you have, I think Jared Allen doesn't even start. I think they have DeAndre Jordan starting. And then, of course, Taurean Prince and Landry Shamet. Those are the main guys that will have to stand up for this team and really like be a better role, because they were both terrible against the Hornets, and they were not impressive either against the Grizzlies when both Katie and Kyrie sat out. They have to step up, but I mean, Landry Shamit's been a good player his whole career. Like, he's not been this bad that he has been his last couple games, and I expect them to step up. It's so early to say that just because of their game against the Charlotte Hornets in the third game of the season, they're going to play that way all year. I think that this team is still my favorite, but you nailed it on the head with losing confidence. Of course, I lost confidence in them escaping from the East when they lost Spencer Dinwiddie. That was a big blow because he was a near all-star guard last year without Katie and Kyrie, and he was very, very impressive to me. Karis LeVert just has to step into the role that everyone thinks he can be now, I think maybe starting. But the next thing I do want us to talk about is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I think this is probably their debut of being talked about on here, since they've been probably the least relevant team in sports. But I do have a question for you guys, and it's a little bit radical with what we've seen in the past without LeBron James on this team. But are the Cavs a possible playoff team this year? Arjun?
Look, I know you guys will call me crazy for this, but I got faith in these Cavs after watching what the Sexland did. It wouldn't be outrageous to say they're a playoff team, and I think they could be a playoff team, because if you look at last year, they've had in the games they played this year, the improvements has been absolutely insane. I mean, their defensive rating as a team was worse than the Hawks. And I mean, they now look at them right now, they're second in defense throughout the entire league. They're besides the Nets. They're second in defensive rating. So Andre Drummond has been a terrific pickup for them. We all know what Garland and Colin Sexton have done. And then you look at the teams that are competing. I mean, the Hornets have coaching issues. They've got a center problem right now. The Hawks have serious spacing issues and perimeter defense problems. The Wizards just they have Russell Westbrook. I mean, there's always some risks to that. This team really doesn't have any holes to it.
I agree with you to a point where the East is very competitive, and the Cavs are showing the real signs, because they have a lot of potential to have a lot of talent. Like, we haven't seen them play a full year with Andre Drummond. That's true. They picked up JaVale McGee for a bag of chips, like Alfonso McKinney, and maybe I think a second-round pick. That was a really good pickup for them. He's looked like the second coming of Kareem off their bench. But they've played the Pistons, and as much as I love the Hornets this year, they played the Hornets, and then they beat the Sixers without Joel Embiid. I don't think you can really. I think it's way too early and way too little of competition to go out loud and say this 3-0 Cavs team is a playoff contender, because I really don't know that yet. Like, Garland has really looked last year. He was such a disappointing player. Everyone thought he was going to be pretty decent for them, but he was really bad for them, and he's been really, really promising for them this year. And then Sexton is averaging 27 points per game on 66 from 3. Is that sustainable? Is Andre Drummond putting up 20 and 15 sustainable? No. Is Garland putting up 20 points per game sustainable? No, and not until he proves himself. I think it's way too early to call this team a playoff team, and you talked about the other team's issues, like the Hornets, like they're not playing Melo as much as they probably should be for him to reach his max potential right now. But this is a really unprecedented year in sports, and maybe they're just trying. James Borrego said he'll incorporate him back into the system the more he grows throughout the year, because they didn't have summer league. That's not that big of an issue. Of course, Cody Zeller at center is a big issue, but not bigger than the issues the Cavs have. When you look at the Hawks don't have that much of an issue with making the playoffs wise. They do have a little lackluster of a defense when you look at their roster, but with that offense, they can really outscore any defense they don't play. And then the Wizards, you're doing the common drastic overreact to Russell Westbrook being a bad teammate. Scott Brooks has been saying that that's the best team chemistry they've ever had. And of course, Scott Brooks is probably the problem for this team, but Russell Westbrook loves him, so I don't see him going anywhere. But still, even with a bad coach, Russell Westbrook, Bradley Beal, Davis Bertans, Denny Avita, this team is a lot better than the Cavs team right now. And I don't see them having a shot at maybe even the play-in with the teams that are all in front of them. I think the two teams that they're absolutely better than are the Bulls and the Knicks. I can't promise they'll be better than the Pistons, because they do have a lot of potential. They do have a lot of talent on that roster. It's just about health and development. But when it comes down to it, I would say agree to disagree on that one. Colin, what do you think?
11 seed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to give a lot of credit to JB Biggerstaff. He's the coach of the Cavs right now. because it would have been really easy to look at last season and look at the roster they have right now and say, well, let's just wait till the offseason and write off this season completely. He's given them a reason to believe in this team, and they've come out and shown it. Tons of credit to him. But all these stats that these players have been putting up, completely unsustainable. It's not going to continue. Like, you just can't tell me that Sexton's going to shoot over 60% from three. Garland's going to be putting up over 20 points per game. Andre Drummond's going to continue to play like an all-NBA first-team player. Like, it's just not sustainable. Their defense has been impressive to me. Maybe they can keep that part up, but their offense just isn't going to be at this same level. And I just don't think they have the bench to sustain that. And Kevin Love's injury is going to hurt them depending on how long he's out and when he comes back from that. I think if everything goes right, they have a shot at the play-in tournament. That means everything goes right. Mm-hmm. And they can continue to play at somewhat of a similar level. Otherwise, lottery team.
Colin, I know both of you guys think that I sound like I'm spewing recency bias, but the thing is that you guys are right. They're not going to maintain the 66%. They're not going to maintain this 27 point per game. But I mean, Darius Garland, like you said, we all thought he was going to be a great player coming in last year. Maybe this is his time to shine. Maybe this is where we actually see what we thought we were going to see. So don't be surprised when he puts up like 20 points per game. Don't be surprised. I mean, we all know Colin Sexton did. He's one of the league's most underrated. I mean, one of the most underrated players in the NBA today. Don't be surprised if he puts up 20 points per game. And then, Colin, you said that Drummond's production is unsustainable. This guy averaged like 17 and 17 in his career. I mean, he's one of the greatest rebounders of all time. This guy can put up some crazy numbers. And he hasn't been televised much because he's played on the Pistons. And everybody says that, oh, it's the Pistons. Like, you're going to get all that rebounds, but it's still 17. It's still a hell of a lot of rebounds. So I think that if this Cavs team keeps up like a good production and they're still showing the same defensive effort, they still have Isaac Okoro, and they still have Kevin Porter Jr. to develop. He's still a young star. So this team has a bright future, but I would not be surprised at all if they're in that playoff contention.
Yeah, no, okay. When it comes to that, like, I just, for the Cavs fans that are watching, if you guys are out there and you guys are watching, you're probably mad at me. For the first time, I'll give credit where credit's due, of course, to JB Bickerstaff and that entire team. This is the first time the Cavs have had hope without a guy named LeBron James on their roster, and that's something that really needs to have credit towards the Cavs for. They have a lot of young talent. I think they'll be a playoff team when the years come. They have Kevin Love right now, which will probably be traded relatively soon if they can get him off the books, but he's also on his $30 million a year contract. Andre Drummond has a contract year this year. He's probably going to be pretty good this season to get that contract. He's looking to try to shoot more, which is either a really good or a really bad thing. But generally, with the young talent they have Sexton, who's one of the most underrated scorers in the NBA. Garland is now finally showing flashes of being a fifth overall pick, maybe. And then Isaac Okoro, of course, is a great defender and a great basketball player coming up on the uprise. And I generally give credit to Cavs for finally having hope for a future, but I can't give them any hope for a playoff spot this year. But the next thing I do want to talk about is Nikola Jokic enough to put the Nuggets into contention to leave the West and maybe even title contention with how he's playing? Myself, I would say that Nikola Jokic, I mean, the way he's playing, I'm not going to say it's unsustainable. He's averaging a triple-double. He's putting up a freakish amount of assists, even when they lost a lot of bench scoring and a lot of help in Jeremy Grant and Mason Plumlee, and Jamal Murray's even been struggling. The way he's been performing, even without the players playing up to what they've been supposed to, has been amazing. And I think it's honestly a sustainable play style for him, and I think he could play up to that level and maybe even higher for this season. He could definitely be an MVP candidate when it comes down to it. He's been one in the past. But when it goes down to title contending, I feel really bad for those top tier teams that aren't really there yet because they're in contention technically, but the Lakers and the Nets are just on a whole new level. You have the Lakers, you have two top three players in the NBA arguably, with then probably the best bench in the NBA and one of the best starting lineups besides them in the NBA too. Like, you have just such incredible teams in front of them right now, where I can't put them in contention to leave the West or contend for a title. But when it comes down to if they could contend to leave the West, the thing that would have to happen is Michael Porter Jr. and slash and actually and would be Bol, but mainly Michael Porter Jr. would really have to be the X factor of this team. He would have to play that amount of minutes. He would have to play 30 plus minutes per game and be performing at the level that they want him to be while not getting injured. I have no doubt he could play at that level, but the injuries and the consistency are really the problem with him. And if he can be the X factor of that team, and Jamal Murray can get his play up to what people thought it was going to be coming out of the bubble, then absolutely they could be a contender. But with Jokic's best help being a player who's not really yet all-star caliber, with the talent there is in the NBA, I really can't call them a contender at all.
You know, Ben, this may be the only time I ever say this on here, so cherish it. I completely agree with every single thing you just said. So I think Jokic is an amazing player. I think what he's doing right now, number of assists, is crazy and not really something we've seen before. But I think that with Jamal Murray, he can't sustain the numbers he put up in the bubble. He's a great player. Can't sustain those numbers. He's a fringe all-star this season. Michael Porter Jr. has to be a really, really good third option. He has to make a huge step this season for them to even contend in the West. I understand they went to the Western Conference Finals last season. Maybe they can do it again. The Lakers are simply in a tier above everyone else, and so I just can't call them serious contenders because I don't think they can get past the Lakers.
Yeah, I think the only team that could really get past the Lakers this year is the Nets, and that is because, you have basically the Nets are just the Eastern Conference version of them, and they're just kind of the riskier bet of the Lakers, and especially with Spencer Dinwiddie out, it becomes more riskier of a bet. Like, you have, instead of two of the top three players in the current NBA, you have two of the most talented players in NBA history just going at it on the same floor, and they're both on Kyrie, the first time he's ever been on a team that he's selected to be on, and then KD pairing up with his best friend, and then DeAndre Jordan's also amazing friends with them too. So this team's obviously a huge threat, but when it comes down to it, I feel bad because these teams are great teams. In any other year in the NBA's history, these teams would have been contenders for titles, but the talent that the Lakers and the Nets have, I don't really have any bet for any other team in any other conference to make it out.
No, yeah, I think that what you guys are saying is true, but I think that Jokic is having an insane. I think he will actually keep that production up because he's just an insane player. But him alone for this Nuggets team, they lost so much bench power. Mm-hmm. Gary Harris obviously isn't looking too good. Jeremy Grant was looking amazing, on his where he's playing. But he's a terrific player. Bol is really not being played at all. I don't know what Mike Malone is doing with that, but I just think that this team required Jamal Murray to have an absolute just insane performance against the Clippers and to just come back from a 3-1 lead. As much credit as we give the Nuggets, they were down 3-1 in the first place, all right? Jokic was still putting up great numbers if you look at it, but Jamal Murray just was not, he wasn't looking as good as he usually was. And then just that one they were down 3-1, he just went absolutely insane. So they're really going to rely on Jamal Murray. If Jamal Murray isn't there when they need him, this team just isn't going to be as good. I know that Michael Porter Jr. is a great player, and he needs to be the X factor. That's completely true.
Yeah,
but this team with Jokic alone, carrying that scoring alone, is just not going to cut it with other teams.
Speaking of unsustainable play, I've been talking about this for a while, and a lot of people, of course, recency bias overtakes a lot of people. But when I talk to a lot of people, and especially in our comment section right here, I get clowned a lot when I say Jamal Murray wasn't going to keep up that play in the bubble. There's a lot of flukes that are going to come out of the bubble. Donovan Mitchell's not going to average 50 points a game coming out of the bubble. We know that he's a great player. But then, you look at the Heat,
Ben, I think that's not just fluke, and that's just the difference between playoff and regular season.
No, I'm not talking about the Nuggets. Let me talk here. So you look at Jamal Murray and you say, Jamal Murray, he's been this same player that he's playing in the regular season with just a little better shooting stats that he's playing right now. But people thought coming into this year he's going to carry everything he was in the bubble, which just can't be true. That's the definition of just playing unsustainable play. He wasn't going to be like that in the regular season. They finally came down from their playoff high, and he played like that all playoffs. But coming into it, now he's averaging just a little worse than what he was the year before in the regular season. I think that's nothing new to expect from him. But if Michael Porter Jr. can play at a 20-point game level that he did in the bubble, and then Bol also steps up and becomes a reliable part of this rotation, maybe even at the small forward position, then maybe they can take the Lakers to 7 games. And that's really, really a crazy thing because they're a really talented team. But I do want to move on to football, talk about it for a little bit, and say, where does Baltimore, the Baltimore Ravens, where do they rank among the scariest teams in the AFC, Colin?
I think I have them at 4th right now. Behind the Chiefs, it's a no-brainer. Behind the Bills, Josh Allen's connection with Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley has been amazing this season. Had it been nearly any other season, I think Josh Allen would be an MVP candidate. That team's scary, and they are hot right now, and they're hot at the right time. I think the Titans, I know this loss this weekend was really, really bad to the Packers, but Ryan Tannehill's looked great this season. Derrick Henry's looked like an MVP candidate. I think they're better than the Ravens. The Ravens haven't necessarily been that consistent. There's been talk of other teams apparently knowing their plays when they get to the line of scrimmage. And Lamar Jackson, if he doesn't get his running game going, it's harder for him because I'm not going to put this on him. He doesn't have wide receivers. I mean, it's really hard to ask him to throw when Hollywood Brown is his best wide receiver. I just don't see the Ravens being that scary because they're fairly predictable.
I would say no. Okay, Arjun. Arjun, I know you're a big Lamar Jackson guy, so I pretty much know what you're going to say, and I do disagree with both of you guys. Assuming you agree with Colin, I don't see them being really a scary team at all. I see them literally being the least scary team to go deep in the playoffs in the AFC, and that shouldn't be a crazy thing. We've seen it every year. Lamar Jackson's career, he's underperformed in the spotlight. Every big game he's had in his career, he's underperformed. Every time he plays the Chiefs, every time it's a rivalry game, every time he plays the Steelers, every time it's in the playoffs, Lamar Jackson underperforms when he's in the spotlight. He can't perform in those big moments. And I know you said it yourself. They don't have elite receiver play at the least. They don't have receiver play at all. Willie Snead, Hollywood Brown, the current Dez Bryant. This team is not reliable or sustainable to go anywhere in the playoffs, especially. And then Lamar Jackson, people are now saying that MVP Lamar's back in the regular season. He's now finally getting back to his final form. He's not really that caliber of player when it comes to being in the spotlight. He's not the type of player to make them scary. And I mean, I definitely can't make them more dangerous than the Steelers, the Bills, the Chiefs, or the Titans. Those are undoubtedly better and scarier teams than they are. And then you look at, I would say, the Miami Dolphins. I would say they're scarier because of that 2-quarterback system they have where they have like Tua. He can't really perform when it comes late in the game. And then you throw in Ryan Fitzpatrick in the fourth quarter to really be the closer, the first ever closer in football there really ever has been. And it worked very well. And we've seen them perform really well. And then you look at the Browns. I would say the Browns are a scarier team right now with how great of a defense they have. And Baker Mayfield has been showing signs of consistency. They're currently 10-3. They're looking great right now. I know they lost to the Jets, but the Jets have also looked decent in the last 2 weeks. And then you look at the Colts. The Colts are probably the most underrated team in the NFL due to how great that defense is and how just consistently above average that offense is. Like, it's not a great offense, but they have good play on both sides of the ball and elite play on the defensive side of the ball. So I say all of these teams are way more dangerous than the Ravens when it comes down to it because they have no weapons for Lamar to use when it comes to the playoffs, and Lamar isn't a weapon himself when it comes to being in the playoffs.
All right, first of all, I completely disagree with that. I'm with Colin on this one because I think we had identical lists. I think the Chiefs, Titans, and Bills. I mean, Bills, the only reason I have them above the Ravens is because of the recent performance. Obviously, they've been absolutely insane, but Josh Allen has been a complete fluke in the playoffs He was a complete fluke in the playoffs last year. And I honestly think he won't continue that. And that's one of the reasons why I don't say he's an elite quarterback because he hasn't proved himself in the playoffs yet. But I think that the Ravens are a more dangerous team than the Dolphins because you're also looking at the Ravens who are a primarily defensive team. Their defense team carried the load. I mean, they were a 14-2 team last year. And even though they did lose in the playoffs, Lamar Jackson wasn't terrible. I mean, he had to go up against the Titans. The King Henry was absolutely insane. But, I mean, the Dolphins, you mentioned the two-headed snake of Tua and Fitzpatrick. That's great. But, I mean, besides Devontae Parker, they have a solid defense. but they're, I mean, they're young, they're a good, like, rising team, but they're not, like, at the Ravens' defensive level. I mean, the Browns, you see the Browns have Myles Garrett. I mean, they've got an all-right defense, but it's not like a Ravens-level defense or like a Colts-level defense, a game-changing defense. And Baker Mayfield, who I still don't like. You guys all know that. I just don't like Baker Mayfield. I don't think he's a good QB. He makes bad decisions, but I just think that this Ravens team, although, I mean, Lamar is predictable, his game plan, you can box in safeties, but I honestly think that he has shown it before that he can potentially make weapons in Hollywood Brown, in Willie Snead. They are not great receivers, but he can make weapons into them in the playoffs, and I have faith in Lamar Jackson that they will be a dangerous team.
He hasn't shown there's a possibility you could make Marquise Brown. Hollywood Brown. He has the speed. He has the agility. He has that part of him that could be a great receiver. He just is a terrible route runner. He can't create separation, and there's just so many problems with him. He's the cancer. Like there's people thought he was going to be great. He hasn't shown any signs of being that, but he has small signs of being able to do that, but he hasn't shown them this season except for that one pass Trace McSorley threw him against the Steelers. But like the teams that are above him, you guys both said, what am I right when I say you guys both said that the Steelers are not more dangerous than the Ravens are right now? Are you aware of the clobbering that happened between the Steelers and the Ravens? I mean, you saw the.
Are you aware of the fact that the Steelers have multiple defensive injuries and their defense is terrible right now? I mean, they only have T.J. Watt. They lost Cameron Hayward, so they're looking pretty bad right now. Their offense is not looking good.
Yeah, their offense is looking terrible. They just benched Big Ben for who was it? Miles? No, not who was it that they benched for their backup?
Mason Rudolph
that played last year.
Mason Rudolph.
That's
Mason
the point,
Rudolph.
Ben. That's the point. If they don't have faith in Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, Juju, even though Juju has 5 yards per game, you brought up that point in an earlier episode, and that's because Juju specializes in catches in traffic. They're still wide receivers that need a good QB, and I don't think Mason Rudolph is really going to make that happen. Like, their defense has holes in it. Jonathan Taylor.
No, I mean the offense. The Ravens offense has more holes than the Steelers offense right now when it comes to playing in the playoffs. Like Lamar's been great as of recently in his past couple games. He's been great, but when we've seen him in the spotlight, when we've seen him play big games, he hasn't been a starting
Ben, you were just
quarterback.
talking about the defense.
He got bounced in the first round last year.
Right now. We're talking
he
about
got
the
bounced in the
Ravens
first round last year. He's lost every single big game of his career, and he's played terribly in all of them. And he doesn't have weapons. He doesn't have a.
Does the Browns not count as a big game?
And he doesn't have a defense on the level of the Steelers. Their team is not the level of any of the teams that are in the playoffs or even in the hunt right now in the AFC when it comes to being scary. Maybe Lamar Jackson can flip a switch in his brain and finally be a consistent and actual good quarterback when it actually comes down to something that's serious and something that is good for the team. When it comes to a game that isn't just off the television, when it's a game with the spotlights on him, if he can turn
what about that Browns game?
MVP caliber quarterback,
Ben, you're just completely ignoring that big primetime game where he pretty much saved the Ravens' asses.
He came in and completely saved the game, and it was what was it, Monday night or Thursday night football? Or it was primetime game. I mean, you're just completely ignoring that game.
That's not a big time game.
I agree with you. Ben, that's outrageous to say that he hasn't performed in any of his games because he's had plenty of primetime games and he has shown up. Of course, he had a terrible game against the Kansas City Chiefs, but I mean, you bring back the defense. This defense is still very elite. I know Calais Campbell is getting old. They still have so many Pro Bowlers on a team. So yes, they're better than the Steelers defense right now because, I mean, the Steelers offense is so lackluster. I don't care if Juju Smith-Schuster stopped dancing. That doesn't magically solve everything. They still have problems on their offensive end. I think that I basically think that the Ravens are predictable. They should still be considered a potential deep playoff run.
All right. The next thing I do want to talk about is our favorites to come out of the NFC and AFC and meet in this year's Super Bowl. Me personally, I would pick. Obviously, in the AFC, I got to pick the Chiefs. The Chiefs are the unanimous pick for me in the AFC. They have Patrick Mahomes, who's, for me, maybe he doesn't win MVP this year because he had that game against the Dolphins, and then Aaron Rodgers played great in the game he played that evening. He played great against the Titans. He's turned it on more that we've gone this season, and I think he'll probably win MVP this year. But the best quarterback in the league, and the best quarterback for years and years to come, will be Patrick Mahomes, and they have Tyreek Hill, they have Travis Kelce, they have that great defense, they have a great O-line, they have Le'Veon Bell in the backfield. I don't care if he's washed or not. He's still a decent running back. They have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They have such an incredibly stacked team. It's kind of like the Lakers of the NFL right now. And then when it goes to the NFC, I think it's the Packers. I don't really see the Saints getting there. The Saints, we've seen them in the playoffs in the past years. Of course, the Vikings didn't make it this year to come and clown them out of there. But Drew Brees, as great of a quarterback as he is, I can't see him in this team, especially with how he hasn't played recently. Like, he hasn't been able to play due to injury recently. I can't see them making it in front of the Packers. I think this is finally Aaron Rodgers' year to get that once again, but I think that it'll be Packers Chiefs in the championship. But Arjun, what do you think?
I'll keep this brief, but I definitely think the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, are going to make it out of the AFC. You could make a statement from the Bills, but I mean, they're just not the level the Chiefs are. And we haven't really talked about their running game because they have Williams, they have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and they have Le'Veon Bell. That is a three-headed snake right there. They're not amazing running backs, but they're perfectly capable of running, of getting great yardage. And they have, of course, just the unbelievable offense they have. Now, you guys may disagree with this, but I'm going to have the Saints to the NFC, and I think it is damn time. The Saints break this streak. I think they're going to break this streak right here. This is the moment where Drew Brees realizes that his career is coming to an end. He's not going to have a lot in the gas tank. He has Jared Cook. He has Sanders. He has Michael Thomas. I mean, he has these offensive weapons. I mean, Cameron Jordan. They have Cameron Jordan. They had the best rushing defense in the league. This is a team where they're at the pinnacle of their franchise for a while. This is a team where I think they can make it over the Packers. They are determined. They've had so many losses where I think it's their point where, you know what, screw it. We're gonna make it to the Super Bowl, and I think that Drew Brees can do it.
All right. I didn't come on here to say the same thing as everyone else is thinking. I'm not going to take that Chiefs-Packers matchup. I'm going to take the Bills. The Bills remind me a lot of last year's Chiefs. You got a decent defense, good enough so that you don't lose games. You got an elite quarterback. And then you have three good wide receivers. Stephon Diggs, amazing season. Great last game, 3 touchdowns against the Patriots. I mean, he's playing so well. Then you've got John Brown and Cole Beasley, great second and third wide receiver options. The Bills have just looked so good. Everything's going right for them at this time. And honestly, Josh Allen's numbers are not that far behind Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers. They're just such a good team right now, and it'd be really hard for me to bet against them. And I think at some point they are going to be the team that comes out of the AFC this year. I also think right now it's hard to say Mahomes isn't playing good, but he's not playing great. He's playing decent right now. And right now, he in the last couple of games, he's played a little worse than he has. He's had under a 55% completion, or around a 55% completion percentage in his last 2 games. His QB rating has been under 100 for 4 straight games now, which is, I think, the longest stretch of his career in the last couple of seasons. So I think things are going wrong at the wrong time for them. The Bills, everything's going right. Got to be the team I'm betting on. And the Packers, obvious choice right now. Aaron Rodgers playing out of his mind. Their wide receiving core is great. Running backs are good. Defense is good enough. They're the perfect team right now, in my opinion, to make it to the Super Bowl.
I disagree with that, but of course, like, it's not a team where I'm like flipping out that you would pick them. They're currently the 2 seed in the AFC. They're playing at a top level. I think the reason that I can't pick them, it's just like why I can't pick a team like the Nuggets or like a team in the NBA that is a great team to beat another team like the Chiefs. Like, there's no team that matches the Chiefs right now. Even when Mahomes isn't playing at his top tier and an MVP best player in the NFL type level that he usually is, and he's just playing normal, great football. I think he's still playing great football right now, and he'll absolutely turn it on for the playoffs. He was Super Bowl MVP last year. I just can't see anybody in the AFC topping them. Maybe the Packers could take him down. I myself want Aaron Rodgers to win this year because I just want to see him at least go out with a ring if he goes out this year, which I would say he maybe does. But I can't bet on the Bills. They're a great pick. If you do want to pick somebody besides the Chiefs, they're probably the best option besides the Chiefs to pick to go to the Super Bowl. But I just can't bet against the Chiefs this year. But the next thing I do want to talk about, and the last thing we are going to talk about today, is about the Rams, and that is, do the Rams need an upgrade from Jared Goff at quarterback to win a Super Bowl?
I'll start this one off, and I think that we all know that this Rams defense, we all know that Aaron Donald is an absolute wrecking ball on the defensive. And we all know Jalen Ramsey is probably the second best cornerback in the league right now behind Stephon Gilmore. But, this team, this is a Super Bowl caliber defense. This defense, besides those guys, they still have such a great defense on the offensive, and they have Cooper Kupp and they have Woods. But I think that if you look at Goff as a player, he's so mid, but he just makes such terrible decisions at certain points, because if you look at the last 7 games, he's had 9 turnovers, and he's just so consistently inconsistent, if that kind of makes sense. He just hasn't – he's the type of quarterback where if you're in the Super Bowl, Ben, I'm relating to the quarterback theory you need a quarterback that doesn't fuck up, and that's obviously what's happening with this team right now. Jared Goff just messes up at so many. He just makes bad decisions. And I think that if you want to win a Super Bowl, then you need to look towards a more consistent quarterback.
I think obviously he's not the pick you want at quarterback. He's not the guy you necessarily you're like, okay, I can have one quarterback who's not Mahomes or Rodgers. I'm picking him. But could they win one with him if they slightly upgraded that O-line and they got maybe a more consistent back there than Cam Akers or whoever they have back there right now, running back, and maybe get a superstar receiver? They have Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. They have a great receiver core, but if they got that one X factor receiver, maybe they would win a Super Bowl. So I wouldn't. He's not bad. He's so middle of the pack. It's painful to watch. It's kind of like he's the I don't want to relate him to Cody Zeller. We've talked about Cody Zeller so much today, but he's kind of like the Cody Zeller of the NFL. He's just so incredibly average. I would say if they want to be really in that contention to win a Super Bowl, then they would need to upgrade from Goff. But could they win one with him? I think so. If they made the upgrades to win a team with a quarterback like him, there's been worse quarterbacks that have been on that stage, and he almost won one against the Patriots, but of course he didn't show up. But when it really comes down to it, he's so painfully average and so hard to watch because of that I wouldn't want to do anything with him being my Super Bowl quarterback, if that makes sense. But Arjun, what do you think?
Oh, no, Colin, go ahead.
Yeah.
When I looked at the list of topics for today, Jared Goff was on there, and I sat there for a minute, and I'm like, I forgot about this dude. He's that mid that he just is there. He's simply there. You never hear about him because and it's not even that he's mid because he doesn't put up the stats or this or that. He just makes a lot of mistakes that outweigh most of the positives that he would make. So my thing for a quarterback, I've said this a lot, but they can't make or break the game. And he does. Even though he's average, he makes or breaks the game because of the costly mistakes, fumbles, or interceptions, or bad plays that he makes. And he has a really good and talented wide receiving core with kind of that two-headed snake with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. He's got a great defense. I just don't think you could very easily win a Super Bowl with him. However, as the franchise is concerned, you have to build around him right now. As crazy as that sounds, his contract is massive. You're not getting rid of him. No team is going to take on that contract right now. You're going to be stuck with him for 2 more seasons. So right now, you build around him and do everything you can to win a Super Bowl with him at the helm. But you want to move on from him. It would be a good idea to, but you can't with that contract that's $27 million guaranteed up to $35 million. Nobody's going to take that on right now.
Colin,
Yeah,
I think that building around them wouldn't be bad, but decision making is one of the things that it's really hard to change. It's like hard to progress as a QB because you can progress with your arm strength and with your running ability. But with decision making, it comes down to basic fundamentals of whether or not you should throw that pass or not. And I mean, when you see what this defense is doing, they have a solid record right now. That's because of their defense. It's Super Bowl worthy defense. It's absolutely amazing right now. But I just think that if you have James Winston, I think that could be better right now with the receivers they have. If you have Jameis Winston, that could potentially be better because you have a guy who is kind of
Arjun, we simply asked you about Jared Goff. Now you're just digging your own grave. Do not bring up Jameis Winston. Just stop where you are.
It's too late.
That may be too far.
It's too late.
If you have
It's too late. We're sitting here talking about they need a consistent quarterback, and you bring up Jameis Winston. You put yourself.
We were talking about consistency, Arjun.
Now, Jameis Winston is like the biggest what if right now. Like if Sean Payton can get it together, like if he can get it together, if he can get Jameis Winston to become somewhat consistent, he could be a great quarterback and a great replacement for Drew Brees. Not Drew Brees, but he could be a great replacement for him in a different play style. But if you're saying they have better odds of doing something,
that was Jameis Winston than Jared Goff, I was trying to think of another average bench.
You're really
another
just
average bench
asking
QB.
to be
His
an
name
internet
came
meme.
out. That's a slip up. But say you have a guy like Taysom Hill, who's another bench QB.
No,
this guy who doesn't really
that's
mess
also
up.
bad. That guy
Taysom
can't
Hill
throw.
doesn't throw
That guy can't
turnovers.
throw.
Yes, I mean he can run really well, and
He can run.
He can throw, but he's not Drew Brees.
That's like saying that the Rams currently could do better with Cam Newton as their quarterback than Jared Goff. Like, yeah, Cam Newton can run. He can do it really well. We saw it last night. But can he throw? No. Like Taysom Hill can't throw. Like that's why Kamara's complete value dropped so much when Taysom Hill took over, is because Taysom Hill didn't throw him anything, and he's a great receiving back. He really doesn't throw. He's a great Swiss Army knife, meaning he's just really good. He's really average at a lot of positions that he can't start at. Like, but you're not going to sit here and tell me they're going to be better with Taysom Hill than Jared Goff. He's not ideal, but like he's gotten them to a Super Bowl before with a great team. They had a great defense, they had a great running game and great receivers, but Jared Goff got them there. Taysom Hill can't do that for a team. You need to stop before you get too far. And I think that's where we have to stop today. And before we go, if you haven't liked and subscribed already, you should go ahead and do that. If you're still watching, we love you. We hope we hope you had a great Christmas. This is our last episode of 2020, and we'll be back very quickly in 2021 to make it hopefully the year of the half court heave. But that'll be it for us today, and we'll see you guys later. Peace.
Sign out.